Have you ever wondered what happens when a web of perfect lies is torn apart by a single, undeniable truth? This isn't a story about a simple affair. This is the story of Amelia Hayes, 7 months pregnant and living a fairy tale life with her charismatic millionaire husband, Ethan Sterling. It's a story of ultimate betrayal, not just of vows, but of a future built on a foundation of deceit. But more than that, it's the story of what happens when the one you betrayed is the beloved daughter of Alistair Hayes, a man who doesn't just own empires, he commands them. Stay with me as we unravel how a single act of infidelity triggered a corporate war, a social annihilation, and a devastating revenge that proves that some lines should never, ever be crossed. The penthouse on Central Park West was less a home and more a statement. Its floor-to-ceiling windows drank in the New York City skyline, reflecting a life of curated perfection. For Amelia Hayes Sterling, this view was the backdrop to her dream. At 28, she was intelligent, graceful, and 7 months pregnant with her first child. Her husband, Ethan Sterling, was the architect of this dream. A self-made millionaire at 35, he had built his venture capital firm, Sterling Ventures, into a notable player in the tech investment world. He was handsome, ambitious, and to the outside world, utterly devoted to his beautiful wife. Their life was a meticulously orchestrated ballet of high society galas, weekends in the Hamptons, and spontaneous trips to Paris. Ethan showered Amelia with gifts, a vintage Cartier watch 1 week, a first edition Virginia Woolf novel the next. He would place a hand on her growing belly, his eyes shining with what she believed was pure, unadulterated joy. Our little legacy. He'd whisper, his voice a warm hum against her ear. Everything I do, Amelia, is for you and for this baby. But even in the most perfect cages, the bars can start to feel cold. The first hint of a crack in their flawless facade was almost laughably mundane. It was a credit card statement. Amelia, a former financial analyst herself, still managed their personal accounts. Tucked between a charge for a charity auction at the Met and a lavish dinner at Père Say was a name she didn't recognize: the Mercer Hotel, Soho, 785 to 40,000. Ethan had been on a business trip to Chicago that weekend. He'd called her every night, describing the blustery wind off Lake Michigan and the tediousness of his investor meetings. He had no reason to be at a boutique hotel in downtown Manhattan. She brought it up that evening, her tone light, casual, as she swirled a glass of sparkling water. "Honey, did you have a meeting at the Mercer last month? There's a charge here from the 10th. Ethan didn't even look up from his iPad, where he was scrolling through market reports. "Must be a mistake," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "The bank probably miscoded something. I'll have my assistant Jessica sort it out. Don't worry your pretty head about it." Don't worry your pretty head about it. The phrase, once a term of endearment, suddenly felt patronizing, dismissive. A cold knot formed in the pit of her stomach, right above where her daughter was kicking. She let it go, telling herself it was just pregnancy hormones, making her paranoid. A week later, another thread appeared. Ethan came home late from a networking dinner, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. It was a subtle floral scent, L'Interdit by Givenchy. She knew it because her younger cousin wore it. It was a scent for a woman in her early 20s, not the wives of the aging banking executives Ethan claimed to be dining with. "You smell nice," she said, trying to keep her voice even as she helped him off with his coat. "Thanks," he said, kissing her forehead. "Probably just picked it up from someone in the restaurant. The place was packed." He was already walking away, loosening his tie, his mind on a hot shower and a glass of scotch. The excuses were plausible, but they were beginning to stack up like unread newspapers. There were the late-night texts he'd angle his phone away to read the sudden emergency work calls that took him out onto the terrace in the middle of dinner. His voice a low, urgent murmur she couldn't quite decipher. Each instance was a tiny pinprick in the balloon of her happiness. Alone, they were nothing. Together, they were starting to let the air out of her life. The final undeniable thread came during a routine visit to her obstetrician on the Upper East Side. As she was leaving, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, she saw him. Ethan. He was half a block away, standing on the corner of Madison Avenue, laughing. He wasn't alone. He was with a young woman, a striking brunette with long legs and a chic all-black outfit. Amelia watched, frozen, as Ethan tucked a stray strand of hair behind the woman's ear, his touch lingering and intimate. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate kiss right there on the sun-drenched sidewalk. The world around Amelia went silent. The honking taxis, the chatter of pedestrians, the very rhythm of the city faded into a dull roar in her ears. She saw the woman laugh, a bright, carefree sound, and link her arm through Ethan's as they walked into a chic little bistro. Amelia stood there for a full 5 minutes, her hand clenched so tightly on her purse strap that her knuckles turned white. The man who whispered promises into her hair at night, the man who called their unborn child his legacy, had just kissed another woman with a familiarity that spoke of countless stolen moments. The taxi ride back to the penthouse was a blur. The view of the city that had once filled her with joy now seemed to mock her, a glittering monument to a beautiful hollow lie. She walked into their home, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of her heart. She looked at the photos on the mantelpiece, their wedding in Tuscany, their charity work, their perfect smiles. It was all a sham. The gilded cage wasn't a home. It was a stage, and she had been the unwitting star of a one-woman show. The question was no longer if her husband was cheating. The question was, what was she going to do about it? And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was not a problem she could solve alone. She needed her father. Amelia didn't confront Ethan that night. The sight of him kissing another woman had shattered her reality. But a lifetime spent as Alistair Hayes's daughter had taught her one invaluable lesson. Never engage in a battle until you control the terrain. Emotion was a liability. Information was power. She spent the next 48 hours in a state of chillingly calm resolve. She went through the motions discussing nursery colors, smiling at Ethan's anecdotes about work, even allowing him to kiss her goodnight. But inside, she was a strategist mapping out a campaign. The first step was to identify the enemy. She recalled the woman's face, young, sharp, with an air of ambitious confidence. She'd seen her before. A quick mental search, cross-referencing with company newsletters and event photos, brought up a name, Chloe Vance, a junior associate at Sterling Ventures, a rising star, Ethan had once called her. He'd praised her hunger and brilliant market instincts. Amelia now understood he wasn't just talking about her professional acumen. Chloe was 25, impossibly chic, and had been working closely with Ethan on a new fintech acquisition for the past 6 months. Knowing the who wasn't enough. Amelia needed the what, where, and how often. Crying to Ethan would only result in a cascade of lies and gaslighting. He would call her hormonal paranoid crazy. He would twist reality until she doubted her own eyes. No, she needed irrefutable proof. She didn't turn to a friend. This was too private, too humiliating. She made a single discreet phone call to a number her father had given her years ago for emergencies. The man who answered was Frank Miller, a private investigator whose gruff demeanor belied a meticulous, almost artistic approach to his work. He was ex-NYPD, with a network of contacts that ran through every doorman and valet and maitre d' in the city. "Amelia," Frank's gravelly voice came through the phone. "Your father said you might call one day, hoped you never would. What's the problem?" Amelia, sitting in her pristine white marble bathroom, laid out the facts with the detached precision of a CEO outlining a hostile takeover. She gave him Ethan's name, Chloe Vance's name, the date of the Mercer Hotel charge, and the location of the bistro on Madison Avenue. "I don't want suspicions, Frank," she said, her voice devoid of tears. "I want a timeline. I want receipts. I want photographs. I want everything." "You'll get it," he promised. "Give me a week." The week was the longest of Amelia's life. She felt like an actress playing a part she no longer believed in. Every loving word from Ethan was a shard of glass in her ear. Every touch felt like a violation. She focused on her baby, talking to her, reading to her, creating a tiny protected bubble in the midst of the storm she knew was coming. Exactly 1 week later, a plain manila envelope was delivered by courier. Inside was a USB drive and a short typed note from Frank. "Amelia, I'm sorry. The evidence is comprehensive." With trembling hands, she plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen filled with folders, each labeled with a date. She clicked on the first one. It contained photos of Ethan and Chloe at a candlelit dinner at a secluded restaurant in the West Village, their heads close together, his hand covering hers on the table. Another folder showed them entering the Mercer Hotel, their arms around each other. There were receipts for gifts, a diamond necklace from Tiffany's, a designer handbag from a boutique on Bleecker Street. Things Ethan had never bought for her. The timeline stretched back 8 months. It had started just after she announced her pregnancy. The betrayal was staggering in its scope and audacity. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had been living a complete double life. The final file was a short audio recording captured by a discreet microphone Frank had paid a waiter to place on their table. Chloe's voice was light, girlish. "But what about Amelia? The baby is due soon, isn't it?" Ethan's reply was the blow that finally shattered Amelia's composure. He laughed. It was a low, dismissive sound. "Amelia is comfortable. She has everything she wants. The pregnancy is a complication, sure, but it solidifies my position with her father. Alistair would never rock the boat for his grandchild. After the baby is born and the new fund is closed, I'll handle it. I'll make it easy for her. She'll be well taken care of." Handle it. A complication. Make it easy for her. He wasn't talking about his wife and child. He was talking about a business merger. A problem to be managed. The love, the promises, the shared dreams. It was all a calculated performance to secure his standing with her father. She wasn't his partner. She was his collateral. That evening when Ethan came home, Amelia was waiting for him in the living room. The laptop was open on the coffee table, a single photo of him and Chloe kissing displayed on the screen. He stopped dead in the doorway, his briefcase slipping from his hand and hitting the polished floor with a dull thud. The color drained from his face. "Amelia, what is this? This is your life, Ethan," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "The one you've been living behind my back for the last 8 months." For a moment, he was speechless. Then the instinct for self-preservation kicked in. He launched into the script she had predicted. "This is not what it looks like. She's just a colleague. You're pregnant, your hormones are all over the place. You're misinterpreting things. Who gave you this? You've been spying on me. He was trying to make her the villain to turn her pain into paranoia, but Amelia was no longer the trusting, adoring wife. She was Alistair Hayes's daughter. "Don't," she said, her voice cutting through his excuses like a razor. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me. I have seen everything, Ethan. The hotel receipts, the gifts. I have even heard you." She played the audio clip. His own voice filled the silent room, callous and calculating, as he described his wife as a complication. The sound of his own words finally broke him. The facade of the devoted husband crumbled, revealing the craven opportunist beneath. His expression shifted from feigned outrage to pure animal panic. "Amelia, please," he stammered, taking a step towards her. "It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. It means nothing. You and the baby. You're my life. We can fix this. Please, don't tell your father." And there it was, the real fear. It wasn't the fear of losing her. It was the fear of losing his access to her father's world, her father's power, her father's money. Amelia stood up, her hand resting on the swell of her belly, a shield protecting her child from the poison in the room. She looked at the man she had loved, the man she had promised her life to, and felt nothing but a vast, empty coldness. "It's too late for that, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing with a finality that terrified him. "You didn't just break my heart. You threatened my child. You called my daughter a complication. You have no idea what you've just done." She walked past him out of the living room and into their bedroom, locking the door behind her. She picked up her phone. Her hands were steady now. She scrolled to a single contact saved simply as Dad and pressed the call button. The line connected after a single ring. Alistair Hayes. His voice was deep, commanding, even over the phone. "Dad," Amelia said, and for the first time a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I need you to come home." Alistair Hayes did not get to be worth an estimated $60 billion by being a patient man. The founder and CEO of Hayes Global Conglomerate, a sprawling empire with interests in everything from shipping logistics and rare earth minerals to biotechnology and private equity, operated on a single principle: decisive action. When he received the call from his only child, his fiercely beloved Amelia, and heard the tremor of controlled pain in her voice, his world narrowed to a single point of focus. He was in Tokyo, closing a multi-billion-dollar deal on a new robotics firm. Within minutes of hanging up with Amelia, he had walked out of the final negotiation, leaving his stunned Japanese counterparts and his own board members in the lurch. He simply said, "Family emergency. My jet leaves in 30 minutes. Close the deal on my terms or we walk." He knew they would fold. They always did. 16 hours later, Alistair Hayes strode into the Central Park West penthouse. He was 62, but looked a decade younger, with a full head of silver hair, a custom-tailored suit that fit him like a second skin, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a force of nature. He radiated an aura of absolute power that made rooms feel smaller and other men feel inadequate. He found Amelia in the nursery, calmly folding baby clothes. She looked pale, but resolute. He enveloped her in a hug, his usual firm embrace softened with a tenderness reserved only for her. He didn't press for details immediately. He simply held her, letting her draw strength from his presence. "He's in the guest room," she said quietly, pulling away. "He tried to talk to me all night, pleading, apologizing. I locked the door." "Good," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. Now tell me everything." Sitting on a small rocking chair, surrounded by the soft yellows and creams of the unfinished nursery, Amelia laid out the entire sordid story. She told him about the credit card charge, the perfume, the kiss on Madison Avenue. She handed him the USB drive from Frank Miller. Alistair plugged it into a sleek, impossibly thin tablet he produced from his briefcase and reviewed the evidence in silence. His face was a granite mask, but Amelia could see a muscle twitching in his jaw, the only sign of the tectonic rage building beneath the surface. He listened to the audio recording, his eyes narrowing as he heard Ethan Sterling, the man he had welcomed into his family, the man to whom he had entrusted his daughter's happiness, describe his pregnant wife and unborn grandchild as a complication and a stepping stone. When the recording finished, he placed the tablet down with quiet precision. The silence in the room was heavy, dangerous. "Where is he?" Alistair asked, his voice lethally calm. Ethan was a ghost in his own home. He hadn't slept, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his face was ashen with fear. When he saw Alistair Hayes enter the living room, he visibly flinched like a dog expecting a blow. "Alistair, thank God you're here." Ethan began, his voice slick with manufactured relief. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Amelia she's not herself. The pregnancy—" Alistair raised a single hand, and Ethan's words died in his throat. "Do not," Alistair said, each word a chip of ice, "insult my intelligence or my daughter's. I have seen the photographs. I have read the reports. I have heard your voice discussing my family as if they were line items in a quarterly report. You did not have a misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling. You made a calculation, and you have miscalculated." He began to pace slowly, his footsteps silent on the expensive rug. "I vetted you, you know, thoroughly. Your financials were solid, your ambition was impressive, you were clever. I thought your cleverness was an asset. I mistook it for character. I gave you my daughter, my legacy, and you treated her like a stock option." Panic seized Ethan. "Alistair, I love her. I do. This other thing, it was nothing. It's over. I'll do anything to make it right. Counseling, anything." Alistair stopped pacing and turned to face him fully. The look in his eyes was not anger. It was something far worse. It was the detached, analytical gaze of a man about to liquidate a failed asset. "Let me explain something to you about my world, Ethan. In my world, we don't fix things that are fundamentally broken. We tear them down and build something new in their place. You are fundamentally broken." He walked over to the vast window overlooking Central Park. "Look at this," he said, gesturing to the city below. "You saw all of this, and you thought it was the prize. You thought marrying my daughter gave you a key to this kingdom. You are mistaken. My daughter is the kingdom. All of this," he swept his arm again, "is just the scenery." He turned back, his face set. "You have made two catastrophic errors. First, you betrayed my daughter. Second, you underestimated me. You seem to believe my primary concern would be avoiding a scandal for my grandchild's sake, that I wouldn't rock the boat. That is the logic of a small man. My grandchild will be a Hayes. They will be born into a dynasty of strength, not into a house of whispers and compromise. Their mother's honor is the foundation of that dynasty." Alistair pulled out his phone and made a call. "Eleanor, it's Alistair Hayes. I have a new client for you. My daughter." He paused, listening. "The retainer is unlimited. The objective is scorched earth. I want his assets frozen by morning. I want every clause in the prenuptial agreement enforced with extreme prejudice. And I want him out of this apartment by noon tomorrow." Ethan stared, horrified. Eleanor Vance was not just a lawyer. She was the most feared divorce attorney in New York, a legal piranha known for leaving her opponents with nothing but their shoelaces. "Alistair, you can't," Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. "My company, my reputation." Alistair snapped his phone shut and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at Ethan with an expression of profound disappointment, as if observing a failed experiment. "Your company," he said with a dry, mirthless chuckle. "Sterling Ventures was built on seed money from my associates and propped up by the credibility of my family name. Your reputation was rented, not earned, and the lease has just expired." He walked to the door, then paused for one final devastating pronouncement. "You built your little sand castle in my kingdom, Ethan," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Now you get to watch me command the tide." He left the room, leaving Ethan Sterling standing alone in the opulent penthouse that was no longer his, the terrifying reality of his situation finally crashing down upon him. He had not just lost his wife. He had declared war on an emperor. Alistair Hayes did not wage war with cannons and trumpets. His methods were far more insidious and devastating. He waged war in the silent, sterile arenas of boardrooms, stock markets, and back-channel conversations. For Ethan Sterling, the first wave of the attack was not a dramatic confrontation, but a creeping, chilling sense that the world he knew was methodically turning against him. The first blow landed at 9:01 a.m. the next day. An email from the COO of North Atlantic Bank, his firm's primary lender, landed in his inbox. The subject line was "Urgent Review of Credit Lines." The email stated that due to newly identified market volatilities and a reassessment of portfolio risk, the bank was immediately calling in a $50 million bridge loan and freezing Sterling Ventures' operating credit. It was corporate jargon for a death sentence. That loan wasn't just crucial, it was the lifeblood of 3 of his major ongoing deals. Alistair Hayes held a significant, though not controlling, stake in North Atlantic Bank's parent company. It was a connection Ethan had once bragged about. Now it was a noose. He spent the morning in a frantic series of calls trying to secure alternate financing. Every door once wide open was now slammed shut in his face. Bankers who had eagerly taken his calls for years were suddenly in meetings or traveling. The invisible hand of Alistair Hayes was squeezing the life out of his company. The second blow was social. That evening was the annual Children's Health Foundation Gala, the glittering centerpiece of the fall social season. Amelia and Ethan were supposed to be co-chairs. When Ethan arrived, hoping to project an image of stability, he found his name and face had been scrubbed from the event. The programs had been reprinted. The seating chart where he was meant to be at the head table now had a prominent philanthropist in his place. When he approached a group of investors he'd known for years, they gave him curt nods and turned away, their conversations dropping to whispers. He was a ghost at the feast, a pariah in a tuxedo. The message was clear. You are no longer one of us. While Ethan was being publicly ostracized, Amelia was being shielded. Alistair had moved her into a sprawling suite at the Carlyle, a hotel he practically owned, and had her surrounded by a quiet but formidable team. A private nurse to monitor her pregnancy, a chef to handle her meals, and a personal security detail to ensure her privacy. He visited her every day, not to talk about the war he was waging, but to talk about the future. They discussed names for the baby plans for the foundation he was establishing in her name, and the new life she would build. "This is not about revenge, Amelia," he told her one afternoon as they looked out over the city. "Revenge is an emotional, messy act. This is a correction, a realignment of the universe to its proper order. He was a bug on the windshield of our life, and I am simply cleaning the glass." But Amelia knew it was more than that. She saw the cold fire in her father's eyes. This was about retribution. It was about ensuring that the man who hurt his daughter would serve as a permanent public example of what happened when you crossed the Hayes family. Meanwhile, Alistair's silent war escalated. He began a systematic poaching of Sterling Ventures' key talent. The firm's top analyst, a woman responsible for their most successful IPO, received an unsolicited offer from a rival firm for triple her salary and a corner office overlooking the bay in San Francisco. The offer was quietly backed by a holding company owned by Hayes Global. Within a week, Ethan's 3 most vital employees had resigned, taking their expertise and their client lists with them. His company was being hollowed out from the inside. The third and perhaps most brutal front in this war was legal. Eleanor Vance Amelia's new lawyer moved with terrifying speed. She had successfully argued for an immediate and total freeze on all of Ethan's personal and business assets, pending the divorce settlement. Ethan found his personal bank accounts locked. His credit cards declined. He couldn't even pay for his own lawyer. The prenup he had signed, which he thought was a mere formality, was an ironclad document drafted by Alistair's personal legal team. It had a stringent infidelity clause that not only voided any claim he might have to Amelia's assets, but it also clawed back any significant financial gifts received during the marriage. That included the seed money for his company, which Alistair had funneled to him through a family gift structure. Legally, Eleanor Vance was arguing Sterling Ventures itself was a marital gift, and Ethan was now in default. Ethan was trapped. His business was collapsing, his social standing was gone, and he was financially paralyzed. He hadn't yet grasped the full horrifying scope of the attack. He still thought he was suffering a catastrophic run of bad luck, perhaps nudged along by an angry father-in-law. He hadn't yet understood that this wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a meticulously executed campaign of annihilation, orchestrated by a master, and it was only just beginning. The silent war was about to get very, very loud. The silent war became a public execution on a Tuesday morning. The lead story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's Money and Investing section was an exposé titled "Sterling Ventures, a House of Cards." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination cloaked in the language of financial journalism. It detailed with surgical precision the precarious financial structuring of Ethan's firm. It hinted at over-leveraged positions and questionable due diligence in his recent acquisitions. Most damningly, it quoted several anonymous, high-level sources from within the investment community who expressed grave concerns about Sterling's leadership and erratic personal behavior. The sources were, of course, all lieutenants of Alistair Hayes, feeding carefully curated information to a journalist Alistair had on his personal payroll for just such an occasion. The story didn't mention the affair. It didn't need to. It painted Ethan Sterling not as an adulterer, but as something far worse in their world, a bad investment, a fraud, a failure. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By noon, his remaining investors were in a full-blown panic, demanding their money back. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, announced a preliminary inquiry into his firm's practices, triggered by an anonymous tip. Sterling Ventures wasn't just dying, it was being dissected in a public autopsy. beaten and cornered. Ethan did the one thing he had left to do. He drove to the Hayes Global Conglomerate headquarters, a monolithic tower of black glass and steel in Midtown that seemed to blot out the sun. He bypassed the front desk using his old, now deactivated family access card to get to the executive elevator. He rode it to the top floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found Alistair in his office, a cavernous space with a singular, priceless Jackson Pollock painting on one wall and a commanding view of the entire city on the other. Alistair was on the phone, his back to the door. He didn't turn around. "Ethan, I knew you'd come," Alistair said, still looking out the window. Punctuality in the face of annihilation. It's an admirable, if useless, trait. He finished his call and turned his face calm and unreadable. "You did this..." Ethan choked out his voice raw. "The bank, the gala, my employees, the Wall Street Journal. This was all you." "I did not," Alistair corrected him calmly. "You did this. You lit the match. I simply control the wind." "This isn't a correction. This is destruction," Ethan yelled, his composure finally cracking. "You're ruining me." "For what?" "A mistake. People have affairs every day." Alistair walked slowly toward his massive mahogany desk and sat down, steepling his fingers. "You are still thinking on such a small scale. This isn't about the affair, not anymore. That was merely the catalyst. This is about your fundamental character flaw. You saw my daughter as a means to an end. You saw my family as a ladder. Men like you are a virus, Ethan. You attach yourself to success, and you drain it for your own sustenance. I am not just destroying you. I am performing an exorcism." Desperation clawed at Ethan. "What about Chloe?" "The girl I was with, is she next?" Alistair's expression flickered with something cold. "Ms. Vance has already been dealt with. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the managing partner of the law firm, where her aunt, a rather prominent judge, is a senior partner. The second was to the dean of her alma mater, to which I am a considerable benefactor. I explained that a person of her moral character was a potential liability. Her offer for a coveted position at Goldman Sachs has been rescinded. Her name has been quietly blacklisted at every major financial institution in this city. She will be lucky to get a job balancing the books at a bodega in Queens. She like you made a bad investment." The sheer breathtaking scope of Alistair's power was laid bare. He didn't just move money. He moved the entire board. He could end a career with 2 phone calls. Ethan sank into one of the leather chairs opposite the desk, a broken man. "Please, Alistair. Stop. For Amelia's sake. For the baby. Think of the scandal this will cause them." It was the wrong thing to say. Alistair leaned forward, the calm mask dropping to reveal the fury beneath. "You will not use my daughter or my grandchild's name as a shield. The only scandal here is you, and I am erasing you. By the time I am finished, Ethan, your name will be a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. A lesson parents teach their sons about hubris. You will have nothing. Your company will be a bankrupt shell. Your reputation will be radioactive, and your name will be a synonym for failure." He stood up, the audience concluded. "My security team will escort you from the building. Your presence is no longer welcome here or anywhere in my world." As 2 large men in sharp suits entered the office, Ethan looked at the man who had once been his father-in-law. He saw no mercy, no regret. He saw only the icy resolve of an emperor protecting his dynasty. The glass house he had so carefully constructed had not just been shattered. Its shards were being ground into dust, and he was being buried under them. The descent from millionaire to pariah was brutally swift. Within a month, Sterling Ventures was forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The gleaming office in the Seagram building was shuttered, its assets liquidated for pennies on the dollar to pay off creditors. The penthouse on Central Park West, which had been in Amelia's name, was sold. Ethan was left with nothing but a few designer suits and a mountain of personal legal bills. He moved into a soulless corporate rental apartment in Jersey City, the glittering Manhattan skyline now a distant, mocking reminder of the life he had lost. His friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and golf courses, no longer answered his calls. He was a social leper, a financial contagion to be avoided at all costs. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on him day and night. Meanwhile, Amelia was moving in the opposite direction. Freed from the suffocating perfection of her old life, she began to flourish. Her father had fast-tracked the launch of the Hayes Foundation for Maternal and Child Health, a philanthropic endeavor they had once discussed in abstract terms. He didn't just give her a title, he gave her real responsibility. She threw herself into the work, her background in finance proving invaluable. She met with doctors, researchers, and community organizers, her passion and intelligence shining through. The pregnancy was progressing well, and she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't just Alistair Hayes's sheltered daughter anymore. She was Amelia Hayes, a future mother, and the driving force behind a major charitable foundation. She was building a legacy of her own, one based on substance, not style. She rarely thought of Ethan, and when she did, it was with a strange detached pity for the smallness of his ambition. One evening, desperation drove Ethan to make one last pathetic attempt. He showed up outside the Carlisle, waiting for Amelia to return from a foundation meeting. He looked terrible, thin, unshaven, his expensive coat hanging off his frame. "Amelia," he called out as she stepped out of her car. Her security detail moved to intercept him, but she held up a hand. "It's all right, Tom," she said, her voice calm. She faced her estranged husband under the warm glow of the hotel's awning. "What do you want, Ethan?" "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice raspy. "For everything. I was a fool. I lost the most important thing in my life. I know it's too late, but I needed you to hear it." Amelia looked at him, her gaze clear and steady. For a moment she tried to see the man she had fallen in love with, but he was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell. His apology didn't ring of remorse. It rang of regret for his own downfall. "I hear you, Ethan," she said softly. "But forgiveness is not something I am prepared to offer. My only concern now is the health and safety of my daughter. Goodbye." She turned and walked into the hotel without a backward glance, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. That rejection was for Ethan the final nail in his coffin. He was truly alone. Beaten broke and stripped of all dignity, Ethan spent his days in his barren apartment, obsessively replaying his downfall. He blamed Alistair, he blamed Chloe, he blamed everyone but himself. In his paranoid state, he started digging. He wasn't looking for financial data, he was looking for dirt. He scoured old articles, forgotten interviews, and obscure online forums about Alistair Hayes's early days. Alistair was a titan now, but titans always leave footprints when they climb the mountain. After weeks of obsessive searching, he found it. A ghost from Alistair's past. It was a story from the early 1990s concerning Hayes's hostile takeover of a rival shipping company. The company's founder, a man named Marcus Thorne, had died by suicide just weeks after losing his life's work to Alistair's ruthless corporate raiding. The media at the time had painted it as a tragic consequence of a brutal business battle. But Ethan found a comment thread on an old financial blog where a user claiming to be Thorne's former junior partner alleged that Alistair had used illegal tactics, insider information, blackmail to force the sale and ruin Thorne. The allegations were never proven. The partner had vanished into obscurity. But the whispers were there. It was a long shot, a flimsy piece of leverage, but it was all he had. In his mind, it was a lifeline. He believed he had found a crack in the Emperor's armor. He compiled his research into a single damning file. He would not go down without a fight. He would use Alistair's past to secure his future. It was a move born not of strategy, but of pure, cornered desperation. He requested one final meeting with Alistair Hayes, sending a cryptic message through a lawyer. "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say about Marcus Thorne." For the first time in months, Alistair agreed to see him. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He was about to play his last card, unaware that he was walking into the final masterfully set trap. The meeting was not set in the cold corporate stratosphere of Alistair's primary office. Instead, Ethan was escorted to a small private library on the 30th floor of the Hayes Global Tower. The room was a sanctuary of old-world power, a stark contrast to the modern steel and glass that surrounded it. Walls were paneled with dark, rich mahogany and lined with priceless leather-bound first editions. The air smelled of aged paper cedar and the faint, pleasant aroma of Alistair's cigar from the night before. A fire crackled softly in a marble fireplace, its flames dancing across the faces of stoic marble busts of Roman emperors. It was a room that whispered of dynasties and long-held secrets, a room designed to make visitors feel their own insignificance. Alistair Hayes was standing by the fireplace, a heavy crystal tumbler of amber whiskey swirling in his hand. He looked entirely at ease, a king in his own private study. He turned as Ethan was shown in his face a mask of polite neutrality. Ethan, by contrast, was a frayed nerve ending in a wrinkled suit. He clutched a leather portfolio to his chest like a shield. "Ethan." Alistair's voice was a low, calm rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the books around them. "You requested this audience, citing a matter of historical interest, Marcus Thorne, a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in many years. I must admit, you've piqued my curiosity. Please enlighten me." This was it. The moment Ethan had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. He felt a surge of desperate adrenaline, mistaking it for confidence. He stepped forward and placed his portfolio on a massive antique coffee table, opening it with a flourish. "I've been doing some research into your past, Alistair," he began, his voice gaining strength. "Specifically, your acquisition of Thorne Maritime in 1993. A brilliant, if notoriously hostile, takeover. But the story has always been incomplete." He slid a sheaf of papers across the table, old press clippings, printouts from obscure financial forums. "I found things," Ethan continued. His eyes locked on Alistair. "Whispers of insider trading. Allegations of blackmail used against Thorne's board members. And then there's the tragic end to the story. Marcus Thorne, a respected man, a pioneer in his field, utterly ruined. He lost his company, his reputation, his life's work. They found him in his study, dead by his own hand, just 3 weeks after you signed the final papers. A man driven to despair." Ethan leaned in, trying to project an aura of command. "I've made contact with his former junior partner, a man named Paul Ziegler. He's been silent for 30 years, but he's willing to talk now. to the SEC, to the New York Times. He's willing to tell the world how you really built your empire. He sat back, his heart hammering. This was his checkmate. He had found the rotten beam in the foundation of the Hayes Empire. A story like that. The great Alistair Hayes, the benevolent titan of industry, revealed as a corporate predator whose rise was built on the grave of a good man. It would be devastating. Think of the stock price. Think of your legacy. Think of what the world will say. He let the threat hang in the air. I believe we can come to a quiet, private arrangement that would be beneficial for everyone. An arrangement that would allow me to disappear and for this unfortunate history to remain buried. Throughout Ethan's speech, Alistair remained motionless, his expression unreadable. He simply listened, his gaze steady. When Ethan finished, Alistair took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey. He set the glass down on the mantelpiece with a quiet click that echoed in the silent room. Then, to Ethan's utter shock, a slow, cold smile spread across his face. "Is that it?" Alistair asked, his voice laced with a genuine, almost pitying amusement. "That is the hand you've come to play. The ghost of Marcus Thorne." He walked slowly over to an ornate globe standing in the corner of the room. He gave it a gentle spin. "Your mistake, Ethan, is that you are an amateur historian. You read the headlines, but you failed to read the footnotes. You see, I haven't spent the last 30 years hoping this story wouldn't come out. I've spent it preparing for the day it would." He pulled a slim tablet from a drawer and tapped the screen. A section of the bookshelf behind him slid away, silently revealing a large integrated monitor. It showed a live feed of the building's main auditorium. It was filled with journalists, a podium at the front bearing the Hayes Global logo. Ethan stared, confused. "What is this?" "This," Alistair said, "is your legacy. When you sent your little message, my communications team began preparing immediately. You see, you haven't uncovered a scandal. You've simply provided me with the perfect narrative opportunity." He turned his full attention back to Ethan, his eyes glinting like chips of ice. "Let me fill in the blanks your research missed. Was I ruthless with Marcus Thorne?" "Absolutely. Business at that level is a blood sport. But Marcus wasn't a noble victim. He was a fraud. Your source, Paul Ziegler, failed to mention that Thorne Maritime was a sinking ship riddled with debt because Marcus was embezzling millions to cover gambling losses in Monaco. I have forensic reports from Deloitte dating back to 1994 that trace every single dollar to offshore accounts. Marcus Thorne killed himself not because I took his company, but because he was a week away from being indicted on federal fraud charges." The blood drained from Ethan's face. "And your star witness, Paul Ziegler." Alistair chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "Paul is a dear friend. He's currently on his 70-foot yacht, the Severance Pay, off the coast of Grand Cayman. The generous pension I pay him is contingent on a lifelong ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He takes my call every Christmas. He will not be speaking to you or the New York Times or anyone else." Alistair gestured to the screen where his head of power was now approaching the podium. "In 5 minutes I will go downstairs and give a press conference. I will announce the full funding for the Hayes Foundation for Maternal and Child Health in honor of my daughter and the impending birth of my grandchild. Then I will tell the story of Marcus Thorne myself. I will frame it as a brutal formative experience from my past that taught me the profound human cost of corporate warfare. And in his memory, I will announce the formation of a new $100 million wing of the foundation, the Thorne Center for Executive Mental Health and Crisis Support. I will turn your clumsy blackmail into a masterclass in corporate responsibility and philanthropic grace. The headlines won't be about a scandal. They'll be about my redemption." He walked until he was standing directly in front of Ethan, looking down at the broken man slumped in the chair. "Your mistake was never just the affair, Ethan. Your fundamental flaw is that you have no imagination. You look at a man like me, and you see money and power. You don't see the decades of strategy, the layers of contingency. You tried to fight a war of secrets with a man who has never had a secret he didn't plant himself. You brought a knife to a nuclear holocaust." His voice dropped, losing all its warmth, becoming a final devastating judgment. "You will receive no settlement. You will receive nothing. The world will forget your name. You are a footnote in a story that is ultimately all about me. You are the catalyst for my third act transformation into a benevolent philanthropist. For that, I suppose I should thank you." He turned away. "My security will show you out. Do not attempt to contact me or my daughter ever again. Your life as you knew it is over." Ethan was escorted from the building in a daze. He stumbled out onto the bustling New York street, a ghost invisible to the thriving city around him. He had been so comprehensively outmaneuvered, so thoroughly dismantled, that there was nothing left of him but an empty shell. He had not just been defeated. He had been erased. 3 weeks later, in a quiet, sunlit room at Mount Sinai Hospital, Amelia Hayes gave birth to a 7-pound, 2-ounce baby girl. She named her Lily Rose Hayes. Alistair was there, the ruthless corporate emperor, transformed into a doting grandfather. He held the tiny infant in his arms, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle, and looked at his daughter, her face glowing with a serene, powerful happiness he hadn't seen in years. "She's perfect, Amelia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's our future." Amelia smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "She is," she agreed. Later that evening, after her father had left, Amelia stood by the vast hospital window, holding Lily close. The city glittered below a sprawling universe of light and possibility. For months, that view had been a symbol of a life that was a beautiful lie. Now it was different. It was the world she was going to help her daughter navigate. The world she was going to help change through her work at the foundation. The fire of her husband's betrayal had burned down the gilded cage she had lived in, and from the ashes she had emerged not as a victim, but as the architect of her own life. She looked down at the sleeping face of her daughter, a legacy of love, not of deceit. Her new life, a real life, was just beginning. So what do we take away from the story of Amelia Ethan and Alistair Hayes? It's a powerful, brutal reminder that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are world-shattering. Ethan Sterling's betrayal wasn't just a simple affair. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. He didn't just cheat on his wife. He tried to leverage a titan's most precious asset, his daughter. He learned the hard way that when you play with fire, you will get burned. But when you betray a king, he will salt the earth, so nothing can ever grow again. This story is about the ferocious power of a father's love, the resilience of a woman betrayed, and the cold, hard reality that in the world of legacy and power, loyalty is everything. What do you think, was Alistair's revenge justified, or did he go too far? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories of epic drama and sweet revenge, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. The gavel fell with the sound of a closing casket, each strike echoing the death of a 16-year marriage. In the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom, Catherine Bishop sat alone, a ghost at her own funeral. Across the aisle, her husband, Jonathan Pierce, whispered into the ear of his young blonde mistress, a smug smile playing on his lips. His lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, was methodically dismantling Catherine's life, painting her as a wasteful, unstable woman who had driven their perfect marriage into the ground. Every lie was a fresh wound. The judge's face was a mask of weary indifference. The air was thick with defeat. It was over. And then the heavy courtroom doors swung open. He entered, not with a bang, but with a palpable silence that followed him like a shadow. A silence that drowned out the lawyer's droning voice and made every head, including the judge's, turn to look. The Honorable Judge Morrison, a man whose patience had been worn smooth by decades of domestic disputes, peered over his spectacles. "Do we have an interruption?" he asked, his tone laced with annoyance. The man standing in the doorway was tall, his presence filling the space far more than his frame should have allowed. He wore a charcoal suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His hair was dark, flecked with distinguished silver at the temples, and his eyes, a piercing shade of grey, swept across the room with an unnerving, analytical calm. He took in Catherine's hunched form, Jonathan's startled expression, the predatory glint in the opposing counsel's eyes, and finally the judge on his bench. "Apologies for the intrusion, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was a low baritone, a resonant sound that commanded attention without needing to be raised. "My name is Adrian Cross. I am here to represent Mrs. Catherine Bishop." A ripple of murmurs went through the small public gallery. Jonathan's lawyer, a portly man named Walter Schmidt, scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, Mrs. Bishop is already represented. Her counsel is right there." He gestured dismissively at the young, overwhelmed public defender sitting beside Catherine, a man named Paul, who looked as if he was about to be physically ill. Paul stammered, Your Honor, I was appointed to—" Adrian Cross took another step into the room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. "Mr. Paul Riley is a fine, upstanding officer of the court, I'm sure," Adrian said, smoothly, his gaze never leaving the judge. "However, given the complex financial allegations being leveled against my client, he has graciously agreed to step aside. Mrs. Bishop has retained me and my firm, Cross & Associates, as of 10 minutes ago. The paperwork is being filed electronically as we speak." Judge Morrison leaned forward, his interest piqued. The name Adrian Cross was not one you heard in small-time divorce courts. It was a name whispered in the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies and in the hushed halls of international arbitration. He was a corporate killer, a legal phantom who specialized in dismantling empires. What on earth was he doing here? "Is this true, Mrs. Bishop?" the judge asked, his eyes finding Catherine for the first time with something other than impatience. Catherine looked from the terrified face of her public defender to the impossibly composed one of Adrian Cross. She had never seen this man before in her life. A part of her mind screamed that this was a mistake, a hallucination brought on by stress. But as she looked at him, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, but a steely resolve that felt like the first solid ground she had stood on in months. She gave a single hesitant nod. "Yes, Your Honor." Jonathan Pierce, who had been watching this with a mixture of confusion and fury, leaned over to Schmidt. "What is this? Who the hell is that guy?" "Find out." Schmidt was already frantically typing on his phone under the table, His face grew paler with each tap of his thumb. He looked at Jonathan and mouthed the words, "He's the Adrian Cross. We have a problem. A very big problem." The trap had been so perfect. For the last year, Jonathan, with the help of his mistress, Amber Collins, his shrewd and ambitious executive assistant, had been meticulously building a cage for Catherine. They had created a narrative supported by a mountain of fabricated evidence that she was not the supportive wife, but a financial saboteur. His lawyer, Schmidt, had laid it all out in his opening statement just an hour earlier. For 16 years, Schmidt had boomed, Mr. Jonathan Pierce built his company Pierce Innovations from the ground up. He worked tirelessly while his wife, Mrs. Bishop, developed expensive tastes. She saw the company not as a shared dream, but as her personal piggy bank. He presented bank statements cleverly altered, showing extravagant purchases. He produced emails forged where Catherine appeared to be demanding more money, threatening to disrupt business deals if her allowance wasn't increased. The centerpiece of his argument was a series of transfers from a corporate account to an offshore one totaling nearly $2 million. The account was in a name that could be, with a bit of legal squinting, traced back to a distant relative of Catherine's. "She was bleeding him dry, Your Honor." Schmidt had concluded, his voice dripping with false sympathy. When he finally uncovered her deceit and confronted her, she flew into a rage. "This divorce is not the result of a failed marriage. It is the result of grand larceny." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that Catherine had felt the air leave her lungs. Her Paul, the public defender, had offered a weak rebuttal about love and misunderstanding, which only made her look more pathetic. Now standing in the center of the courtroom, Adrian Cross was a granite boulder dropped into a stagnant pond. The ripples were spreading, and Jonathan's perfect trap was beginning to look fragile. "Your Honor," Adrian said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Given these new circumstances, I request an immediate recess for a period of 48 hours to allow me to get up to speed on the case file and the egregious allegations made against my client." Schmidt shot to his feet. "Objection. This is a stalling tactic. We have witnesses' evidence. Mr. Cross can read the file tonight. We should proceed." Adrian turned his head slowly to look at Schmidt. It was not a glare, but a look of such cold, dismissive appraisal that Schmidt visibly flinched. "Miss Schmidt," Adrian said, "the allegations you have presented involve complex financial crimes, including mere wire fraud and embezzlement. You are accusing my client of felonies that carry significant prison time. To suggest I can adequately prepare a defense against such serious charges in a single evening is not only unprofessional, it borders on malpractice. Unless, of course, your evidence is so flimsy that you fear it will not withstand even a moment's professional scrutiny." The barb hit its mark. Schmidt's face turned a blotchy red. Judge Morrison tapped his pen. He looked at the confident, dangerous man before him, then at the sputtering, suddenly second-rate lawyer for the plaintiff. The dynamics of the room had been irrevocably altered. "Mr. Cross has a point," the judge declared. "The nature of these accusations is severe. A 48-hour recess is granted. We will reconvene Friday morning at 10 o'clock sharp. And Mr. Cross," he added, his voice firm, "be prepared." Adrian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Don't worry, Your Honor," he said, the words carrying a weight that settled over the room like a winter coat. "I will be." As the judge banged the gavel dismissing the court, Jonathan Pierce stared at his wife. For the first time since this nightmare began, the smug certainty in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a flicker of something Catherine had never seen there before. Fear. The hallway outside the courtroom was a blur of muted colors and hushed whispers. Catherine felt disembodied, as if she were watching a scene from someone else's life. The young public defender, Paul, mumbled his apologies and all but ran away, clearly relieved to be free of a case that had spiraled far beyond his capabilities. Catherine leaned against the cool marble wall, her legs trembling. She was alone again, until a quiet voice beside her spoke. "Mrs. Bishop." "Catherine." She turned to see Adrian Cross standing there. Up close, his intensity was even more palpable. He wasn't classically handsome, in the way Jonathan was, all polished charm and easy smiles. Adrian's face was one of sharp angles and sharper intelligence. His grey eyes seemed to see right through her defences. "Who are you?" She whispered, the question hanging in the air. "Why are you here?" "My firm was contacted this morning by an anonymous party concerned about your case," he said, his voice carefully neutral. It was a half-truth, but the full story was not for a courthouse hallway. "They felt you were inadequately represented." Catherine gave a bitter laugh. "Inadequately represented, I was being led to the slaughter. But a lawyer like you, I can't afford you. I can't afford a single hour of your time. Jonathan has frozen all our joint accounts. I have nothing." "My fee has been covered," he stated simply, leaving no room for argument. He gestured down the hall. "Let's go somewhere we can speak privately. My car is waiting." The car was a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, a silent cocoon that whisked them away from the courthouse and into the city's churning traffic. Catherine stared out the window, watching the world go by, feeling utterly disconnected from it. For 16 years, her world had been Jonathan. She had met him in her final year of university, where she was studying art history. He was a business student with a dazzling smile and an ambition that burned so brightly it was intoxicating. He had courted her with a single-minded intensity, making her feel like the center of the universe. He told her he loved her, mined her passion for the hidden stories in art. He promised her a life of partnership. "You have the vision, Kat," he used to say, his hand over hers. "I have the drive. Together we'll build an empire, but it will be an empire with a soul." She believed him. When he wanted to start his own tech company, she cashed in a small inheritance her grandmother had left her, giving him the seed money without a second thought. She put her own career ambitions, a coveted curatorial position at a prestigious gallery, on hold to support his dream. She managed their home, hosted his business dinners, and raised their 2 children, now teenagers who were mercifully away at boarding school, shielded from the worst of this ugliness. She was the silent, uncredited partner in Pierce Innovations. The affair had been a brutal discovery. A stray credit card bill for a hotel she'd never been to. A whispered phone call he thought she couldn't hear. When she confronted him, the charming man she had married vanished. In his place was a cold, cruel stranger. "Don't be so naive, Catherine," he had sneered. "Did you really think this would last forever? I've outgrown you. Amber is smart. She's ambitious. She understands my world. You're a relic, a comfortable habit I'm ready to break." But she never imagined he would go this far. He wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to erase her, to paint her as a criminal and leave her with nothing but shame. The car pulled into the underground garage of a gleaming skyscraper in the financial district. The offices of Cross & Associates were on the top floor. They were less an office and more a minimalist temple of power. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was stark and modern, and the silence was broken only by the quiet hum of immense productivity. Adrian led her to a corner office that was likely larger than her entire first apartment. He didn't sit behind the massive mahogany desk, but gestured for her to take a seat in one of the leather armchairs near the window. He sat opposite her, creating an atmosphere of conversation, not interrogation. "Catherine," he began, his voice softer now. The anonymous call was a lie. "I'm here because of your father, Robert Bishop." Catherine's head snapped up. Her father, a brilliant but unassuming history professor, had passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. "My father. You knew him." "A long time ago." Adrian said, his gaze distant. "When I was in law school, I was reckless. I made a foolish mistake, got involved with the wrong people over a gambling debt. They weren't just going to break my legs. They were going to end my career before it began ruin my family. I was terrified. Your father was one of my professors. He barely knew me, but he saw I was in trouble. He didn't just give me advice. He intervened. He used his life savings to pay off the debt quietly with no fanfare. He saved my life and my future." Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes. It sounded exactly like her father, a man of quiet integrity and profound kindness. "I tried to pay him back 100 times over," Adrian continued, "but he would never accept it. He only asked for one thing. He made me promise that if I ever saw someone in his life, his family being crushed by an injustice and I had the power to help, I would do so. He said, 'The world has enough bullies, Adrian. We need more guardians.' I gave him my word. A friend at the courthouse alerted me to your case this morning, to the name Bishop and the public defender appointment. I knew it was time to honor that promise." The story settled into the room, filling the space between them with a legacy of kindness she never knew existed. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like Robert Bishop's daughter. "So," Adrian said, his tone shifting back to business, his grey eyes sharp as flint. "Jonathan Pierce thinks he's clever. He has built a fortress of lies. Now you and I are going to dismantle it brick by brick. I need you to tell me everything. Every detail you can remember about his business, his finances, his routines. Don't censor yourself, censor. Don't dismiss anything as unimportant. The smallest crack is all we need to bring the whole thing down." Catherine took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with something that felt foreign but welcome resolve. She looked at the powerful man before her, the guardian her father had sent from the past. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, clear focus. "Where do you want me to begin?" she asked. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of focused intensity, unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. Adrian Cross did not operate like a lawyer. He operated like a general preparing for war. His office became their command center. A team of 3 was assigned to her case, a bulldog of a forensic accountant named Jean, a young tech-savvy investigator named Maria, who could find a digital needle in a planet-sized haystack, and a junior associate who seemed to survive solely on caffeine and legal precedent. Catherine was no longer a passive observer. Adrian insisted she be an active participant. "You lived with him for 16 years, Catherine," he'd said. "You know his rhythms, his vanities, his tells. You are our most valuable resource." They spread years of financial records across a massive conference table. At first, it was an overwhelming sea of numbers. But with Jean's guidance, Catherine began to see the patterns, the subtle architecture of Jonathan's deceit. Jean pointed out how over the last 18 months, small, seemingly insignificant sums had been siphoned from their joint accounts into various corporate holding entities. It's classic asset concealment. Jean explained, his finger tracing a line of figures. He's making himself look less liquid on paper, hiding the real wealth inside the company's labyrinthine structure, all while building this fake narrative that you were the one spending uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Maria worked her magic. She recovered deleted emails and text messages from old phones and cloud backups Catherine had forgotten existed. They found messages between Jonathan and Amber Collins that went back 2 years, far longer than Jonathan had admitted. The messages were sickeningly intimate, but more importantly, they were incriminating. They discussed the Bishop problem and the exit strategy. In one chilling exchange, Amber wrote, "The offshore account is ready. The paperwork looks perfect. She'll never know what hit her." This was premeditated, a cold-blooded, calculated execution of her life. Catherine, however, provided the key that Adrian was looking for. Rummaging through old boxes of keepsakes she'd brought from the house, she found photo albums, letters, and old documents. Adrian had asked her to look for anything with her signature on it, from different periods of their marriage. "Why?" she had asked. "A signature is like a fingerprint of a person's life," he'd responded. "It evolves. It changes with time, with mood, with major life events." Late on Thursday night, she found it. A birthday card she'd signed for Jonathan about 5 years ago, and a medical form she'd signed 3 years ago after she had broken her wrist in a fall. After the injury, her signature had changed subtly. The flourish on the C was less pronounced. The loop on the B was tighter. It was a minor difference, one she herself had barely noticed, but it was consistent in everything she had signed since the accident. She showed it to Adrian. He examined the old signature and a copy of the $2 million transfer authorization Schmidt had presented in court. His face remained impassive, but Catherine saw a glint in his eye, the look of a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. The signature on the fraudulent document was a perfect forgery of her old signature. It was the signature of a woman who hadn't yet broken her wrist. "They got arrogant," Adrian said, a thin, cold smile touching his lips. "They must have sourced a sample signature from an old document, something from before your injury. They were so focused on the technical details of the forgery that they missed the most human one. This is it. This is the first crack." Friday morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. News of Adrian Cross's involvement had spread, and the public gallery was filled with journalists and curious lawyers. Jonathan and Amber sat at their table trying to project an aura of calm, but Catherine could see the tension in Jonathan's jaw, the way Amber repeatedly smoothed her skirt. Walter Schmidt started the day with blustering confidence, calling his first witness a senior vice president from Pierce Innovations, who testified that the company's finances were in disarray and that all signs pointed to the unauthorized transfers. When it was Adrian's turn to cross-examine, he didn't rise from his chair. He simply leaned forward. "Mr. Davison." Adrian began, his voice quiet, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "You testified that Pierce Innovations is a meticulously run company, correct?" "Yes, the best in the business," the SVP puffed. "And Mr. Pierce prides himself on cutting-edge technology and security." "Absolutely. Our digital security is ironclad." "Then can you explain to the court," Adrian said, his voice dropping a notch, "why a $2 million transfer, the largest unauthorized transfer in your company's history, was authorized not with a multi-factor digital authentication, which is industry standard, but with a simple scanned PDF of a signature?" The witness blinked. "Well, it was an older protocol for certain accounts." "An older protocol for a transfer of this magnitude? That seems careless, wouldn't you say? Almost as if someone wanted to create a paper trail that was easy to falsify." Adrian paused, letting the implication hang in the air. No further questions. The SVP scurried off the stand, his confident testimony now looking like a house of cards in a hurricane. Next, Schmidt called Jonathan Pierce to the stand. This was the main event. Jonathan strode to the witness box, the picture of a wronged, successful man. He recounted his fabricated story with practiced ease, his voice breaking at all the right moments as he described his heartbreak at discovering his wife's betrayal. He was good. He was very, very good. When it was Adrian's turn, he stood up and walked slowly towards the witness box. He held a single piece of paper. "Mr. Pierce," Adrian started calmly. "You love your company, don't you?" "It's my life's work," Jonathan said earnestly. "And you built it on a foundation of innovation and integrity." "Yes, every step of the way." "Then let's talk about the first step," Adrian said, his tone hardening. "The very first one. The seed money that started Pierce Innovations 16 years ago. Where did it come from?" Jonathan froze. It was a fractional hesitation, but in the silent courtroom, it was a thunderclap. A flicker of panic flashed in his eyes before he masked it. "It was from my personal savings and a small family loan," he said a little too quickly. "Really?" Adrian said, taking a step closer. "Because our records show a deposit of $50,000 into your account on October 12th, 2009. The exact amount needed for your initial startup costs. That same day, $50,000 was withdrawn from a trust fund belonging to a Miss Catherine Bishop, a trust her grandmother had left her. Are you telling this court that this is a complete coincidence?" Jonathan's face went white. Schmidt was on his feet, shouting, "Objection relevance! It is entirely relevant, Your Honor!" Adrian countered his voice, ringing with authority. "Mr. Pierce has painted himself as the sole architect of his success, and my client as a freeloader. The truth is that his empire was built on her foundation. She was his first and most important investor, a fact he has conveniently omitted from his testimony." "Sustained, but tread carefully, Mr. Cross," the judge warned, though he was now leaning forward, utterly captivated. Adrian gave a nod, but he had already made his point. He had planted the first seed of doubt. Jonathan Pierce was a liar. Not just about his wife, but about the very genesis of his own success. He let that sink in for a moment, before turning back to Jonathan, a wolfish look in his eyes. "Now, Mr. Pierce," Adrian said, his voice dangerously soft, "let's talk about your wife's signature." The tension in the room coiled tighter. Every eye was on Adrian Cross as he approached the witness stand, a document in his hand. Jonathan Pierce watched him, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the box. The confident mask was slipping, revealing the raw anxiety beneath. "Mr. Pierce," Adrian began, his voice maintaining its deceptively calm tone, "you have presented this document, Exhibit C, as the cornerstone of your case. It is a transfer authorization for $2 million, allegedly signed by your wife, Catherine Bishop. Is that correct?" "It is her signature," Jonathan said, forcing conviction into his voice. "I'd know it anywhere." "Would you?" Adrian mused. He placed the document on the ledge in front of Jonathan. Then he produced another document and placed it beside the first. It was the birthday card Catherine had found. "And is this also her signature on a card you received some 5 years ago?" Jonathan glanced at it. "Yes, it is." "They look identical, don't they?" Adrian pressed. "The same loops, the same slant. A remarkable consistency over the years." "Catherine is a consistent person," Jonathan retorted, attempting a jab. "Indeed," Adrian said smoothly. He then produced a third document, the medical intake form Catherine had signed after her accident. And this Mr. Pierce, this is from 3 years ago. Is this her signature? Jonathan looked at it. It was clearly Catherine's handwriting, but it was different. The subtle changes were there. He hesitated. It was a trap, but he couldn't see the teeth. Yes, he finally said. It looks like her signature. It looks like it, but it's different from the other two, isn't it? Adrian asked, his voice slicing through the silence. A little tighter. The flourish on the C is less pronounced. The B in bishop is sharper. Schmidt jumped up. Objection. Your Honor, where is this going? Is counsel now a handwriting expert? I don't need to be Your Honor, Adrian shot back, turning to the judge, because I am about to call a real one to the stand. But first I want to establish a simple human fact for the court. He turned back to Jonathan, his eyes like steel traps. Mr. Pierce, do you recall your wife suffering an injury about 3 years ago? A fall which resulted in a hairline fracture to her right wrist. The blood drained from Jonathan's face. He remembered. He'd been annoyed at the inconvenience having to cancel a dinner party. It was a minor detail in the grand scheme of his life, a footnote he had long since forgotten. But in this courtroom, that forgotten footnote was about to become a headline. I believe so, he stammered. You believe so? Adrian echoed with mock surprise. Your wife of 16 years, the mother of your children, was in a cast for 6 weeks, and you believe so. Let me refresh your memory. She did. And after that injury, the way she signed her name changed. It was a small, permanent alteration due to the way her wrist healed. Adrian picked up the fraudulent transfer document and held it aloft. The signature on your irrefutable proof, Mr. Pierce, is a perfect forgery of a signature she hasn't used in 3 years. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Schmidt collapsed back into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. Jonathan stared at the document, his mind racing, trying to find an escape that wasn't there. They had used an old check from a joint account as their template, something from years ago. It was such a stupid, arrogant mistake. So I have a question for you, Mr. Pierce, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Yet every word was a hammer blow. How could your wife in the last 6 months sign a document with a signature she is no longer physically capable of making? Did she travel back in time? Or is it more likely that this document is a complete and utter fabrication? A clumsy forgery concocted by someone who was careless. Someone who was so focused on stealing $2 million that they overlooked the one detail that would expose their entire lie. Jonathan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was undone. The fortress of lies hadn't just been cracked, it had been blown wide open. No further questions for this man, Adrian said with utter disdain, turning his back on the witness stand. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess. The room exploded into a cacophony of noise. Jonathan stumbled back to his table, his face ashen. He looked at Amber, his eyes wild with panic. Did you know about this? About her wrist? Amber shook her head. Her own composure shattered. How could I know something like that? It's a detail, a stupid detail. It's the detail that's going to sink us. He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. Across the room, Catherine sat beside Adrian, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of vindication. How did you know he wouldn't have an answer? She asked quietly. Bullies and narcissists have a common trait, Adrian replied, his gaze fixed on Jonathan. They have immense capacity for intricate planning when it serves their own interests. but they have almost no memory for the details of other people's lives, especially their pain. Her injury was an inconvenience to him, so he filed it away and forgot about it. That was his mistake. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted from a divorce proceeding to a criminal inquest. Adrian's next move was as swift as it was brutal. The defense calls Amber Collins to the stand. Amber walked to the box, her high heels clicking like a death watch beetle on the floor. She tried to smile at the judge, a pathetic attempt at the charm that had so captivated Jonathan. It didn't work. Adrian didn't waste time with pleasantries. He approached her holding a new set of documents. "Miss Collins," he started, "you are Mr. Pierce's executive assistant. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said, her voice thin. "And your salary is $120,000 a year." "Yes, a good salary," Adrian conceded, "but perhaps not enough to support the down payment on a $1.5 million condominium you purchased 6 months ago, or the brand new Porsche currently sitting in your designated parking spot at Pierce Innovations." Amber paled. I have other investments." "Do you?" Adrian asked, his voice laced with ice. "Because my forensic accountant, Mr. Jean, couldn't find any. What he did find was this." He placed a document in front of her. It was a bank statement for the offshore account where the $2 million had been transferred. "He found your name, Miss Collins. Not as the primary, of course. That was a shell corporation. But you were listed as a secondary signatory, the one with the power to move the funds. The $2 million transfer from Pierce Innovations landed here. 2 weeks later, $400,000 was moved from this account to the one you used to buy your condominium." He let the silence stretch, the weight of the accusation pressing down on her. "You weren't just the other woman. Were you, Miss Collins?" Adrian's voice was low and menacing now. "You were his accomplice. You helped him fabricate the evidence against his wife, and your payment was a cut of the money he was stealing. He promised you a new life built on the ruins of Catherine's." Amber looked desperately at Jonathan, then at her lawyer, Schmidt, who could only offer a helpless shrug. She was alone. The dream life she had been promised was turning into a nightmare. "Did Mr. Pierce instruct you to help create these forgeries, Miss Collins?" Adrian pressed. "Did he promise you that you would share everything once his wife was out of the picture, penniless and disgraced?" Amber began to tremble, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into dust. Tears welled in her eyes. He said it was our money," she sobbed. "He said she didn't deserve it. He said we were taking back what was ours." It was a confession. The entire courtroom heard it. Jonathan Pierce shot to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "You stupid little fool!" he screamed at her. "Order!" Judge Morrison bellowed, banging his gavel. "Mr. Pierce, sit down and be silent, or I will have you held in contempt." But the damage was done. The betrayal was now complete, a snake eating its own tail. The man who had betrayed his wife for his mistress was now being betrayed by that same mistress right in the center of a silent, watching courtroom. The confession hung in the air, thick and damning. Amber Collins' breakdown on the stand had transformed the case. It was no longer about a messy divorce. It was about conspiracy and fraud. Walter Schmidt's face was the color of old parchment. He had been hired to bully a heartbroken woman into a paltry settlement, not to defend two criminals who had just incriminated themselves in open court. Judge Morrison looked down from his bench, his expression one of pure judicial fury. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice dangerously calm, Are you aware that you have just admitted under oath to conspiring to commit fraud and embezzlement? Amber could only sob in response, a pathetic, broken sound. Adrian Cross let the moment linger before delivering his next blow. He turned to face the judge. Your Honor, in light of this confession and the evidence of a systematic, premeditated plot to defraud my client, and this court, the defense has one more piece of evidence to present. It pertains not just to the divorce, but to the very legitimacy of Pierce Innovations and every asset Mr. Pierce claims as his own. Jonathan, who had been forced back into his seat by a stern-looking bailiff, looked up, a new kind of dread in his eyes. What more could there be? He had been exposed as a liar, a cheat and a thief. He thought he had finally hit rock bottom. He was wrong. Proceed, Miss Cross, the judge said, his voice grim. Adrian nodded to his young investigator, Maria, who was sitting in the first row. She stood and handed him a thick file. For the past 48 hours, Adrian began addressing the court. My team has been conducting a deep dive into the corporate history of Pierce Innovations. Mr. Pierce testified that he built his company from the ground up with nothing but his own genius and a small family loan. We have already established that the initial seed money was in fact provided by my client, Catherine Bishop. He paused, letting his eyes sweep over Jonathan. But a company like Pierce Innovations isn't just built on money. It's built on an idea, a core patent. In this case, it was a revolutionary data compression algorithm, patent number 78451B. This algorithm was the bedrock of his company, the technology that secured his first major contracts and set him on the path to becoming a millionaire. Jonathan's posture went rigid. It was a subtle shift, but Catherine saw it. She knew his every tell. This was not the panic of a cornered liar. This was the terror of a man watching a buried ghost claw its way out of the grave. The patent was filed 17 years ago under the name Jonathan Pierce. Adrian continued, his voice steady and relentless. But we found something curious. My investigator, Maria, is exceptionally talented at digging through the digital graveyards of the past. She found fragments of early email correspondence from the university servers used by Mr. Pierce and my client's late father, Professor Robert Bishop. Catherine gasped softly. Her father. What did he have to do with this? Professor Bishop, as some may know, was a history professor, Adrian said. But his hobby, his private passion, was cryptography and theoretical mathematics. He published several obscure papers on the subject in academic journals. The emails show a lengthy, detailed correspondence between a young, ambitious Jonathan Pierce and Professor Bishop. In these emails, Mr. Pierce is asking the professor for help with a theoretical problem he is working on for a class project. Adrian opened the file. Over a period of 6 months, Professor Bishop, in his typically generous fashion, essentially mentored Mr. Pierce. He outlined the core mathematical principles, provided the foundational logic, and even wrote out strings of the preliminary code for what would eventually become Patent 78451B. The final email in the chain is from Professor Bishop. He writes, Adrian cleared his throat and read aloud. Jonathan, I think this is as far as I can take you. This looks very promising. I hope you get an A on your project. All the best, Robert. The courtroom was utterly silent. There is no further correspondence, Adrian said, closing the file with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. 2 weeks after that final email, Jonathan Pierce dropped out of his MBA program. 6 months after that, he filed the patent for the data compression algorithm, solely in his own name. He never spoke to Professor Robert Bishop again. He used the $50,000 from Catherine to incorporate and built his entire career, his entire fortune, on the intellectual property of the kind, trusting man whose daughter he would one day marry and then systematically try to destroy. Catherine felt the world tilt on its axis. Her father's work. It had all been her father's. Jonathan hadn't just taken her money. He had taken her father's genius. His courtship of her suddenly seemed sinister in retrospect. Had he targeted her? Was their entire life, their entire family built upon this monumental foundational lie? Objection. This is baseless speculation. Hearsay, Schmidt yelled, scrambling to his feet, but his protest was weak, pathetic. It is not speculation, Adrian thundered, his voice finally rising with righteous anger. We have the emails, we have the professor's academic papers, which predate the patent and contain the core theorems, and we are prepared to bring in expert witnesses from the nation's top universities to testify that the work is undeniably that of Professor Robert Bishop. This isn't just marital fraud, Your Honor. This is the original sin of Pierce Innovations. The company itself and every dollar it has ever generated is the fruit of a poisoned tree. He turned and looked directly at Jonathan Pierce, his gaze filled with a cold, absolute contempt. You didn't just betray your wife, Mr. Pierce. You robbed a dead man. You built your house on stolen ground. Jonathan Pierce finally broke. He slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out man. There were no more lies to tell, no more escape routes. He was surrounded by the ghosts of his own betrayals, the ghost of his mentor, the ghost of his marriage, and the ghost of the man he pretended to be. Adrian Cross stood before the bench, his work almost done. He had not just defended his client. He had unearthed a decade and a half of deceit. He had fulfilled the promise he made to a kind professor all those years ago. He had become the guardian Robert Bishop had asked him to be. Your Honor, Adrian said, his voice now calm and steady again. We are no longer asking for a fair division of assets. We are demanding a full forensic dissolution of Pierce Innovations. We contend that 100% of the company, its patents, its holdings, and its profits are the rightful property of the estate of Professor Robert Bishop, of which my client, Catherine Bishop, is the sole heir. Silence. Then Judge Morrison, his face a granite mask of judgment, looked at Jonathan Pierce and spoke. Mr. Pierce, he said slowly, I suggest you and your counsel have a very serious discussion, because from where I'm sitting, you're not just about to lose a divorce case. You're about to lose everything. The 45-minute recess that followed felt like an eternity. Catherine sat with Adrian in a small, private conference room. The silence between them comfortable, profound. The shock of the final revelation, the theft of her father's work, was still settling over her. It was a betrayal so deep it retroactively poisoned every memory she had of her marriage. Every success Jonathan celebrated, every lavish vacation, every proud moment, it was all tainted, all built on a crime against her family. I can't believe I never knew, she whispered, staring at her hands. My father was so humble. He would talk about his puzzles and his little math problems. He never said a word. That's who he was, Adrian said gently. He helped a student with a project. In his mind, that's all he did. He would never have imagined someone could be so monumentally deceitful as to steal his work and claim it as their own. And Jonathan, he married me. Was it all part of it? to keep the connection to my father quiet, to make sure I never found out. It's possible." Adrian admitted, his expression grim. "A man who could do what he did is capable of anything. Marrying you would have been the ultimate cover, the brilliant inventor's daughter by his side. It completes the picture, buries the truth even deeper." A cold fury began to replace Catherine's grief. It was a clean, hardening anger that burned away the last vestiges of the victim she had been. She wasn't just fighting for her share of a marital estate anymore. She was fighting for her father's legacy. Meanwhile, in another room down the hall, a very different conversation was taking place. Jonathan Pierce was pacing like a caged animal, his face pale and slick with sweat. Walter Schmidt, his lawyer, sat slumped at the table, his briefcase open but untouched. "There has to be a way out of this," Jonathan snarled, whirling on Schmidt. "You're my lawyer. Fix it. Fix it." Schmidt's voice was incredulous. "Jonathan, you lied to me. You told me this was a simple if contentious divorce. You told me the business was clean. You failed to mention that your entire company is built on intellectual property theft. Did you really think that wouldn't come out? It was 17 years ago. It was buried. Nothing is ever buried when Adrian Cross is on the other side of the table." Schmidt shot back, his frustration boiling over. "He's not a divorce lawyer. He's a corporate assassin. He has university emails, academic papers. He will bring in an army of experts who will tear that patent apart and prove beyond any doubt that you stole it. And that's before we even get to the wire fraud. The embezzlement and the conspiracy charges you and your girlfriend confessed to in open court. The reality of his situation was crashing down on Jonathan. The SEC, the IRS, potentially the district attorney's office. This was no longer about losing money. This was about losing his freedom. "What do I do?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a primal fear. "You have one move left," Schmidt said, his tone flat. "Unconditional surrender. We go back in there, we throw ourselves on the mercy of the court, and we give her whatever she wants. Everything. The company, the houses, the accounts. We give it all back in the hope, the faint hope, that she will be satisfied with total financial victory and won't press the criminal charges." The thought of giving Catherine everything, of being left with nothing, was galling. But the thought of a prison cell was terrifying. Amber Collins was having her own reckoning. She had been sequestered in a separate room with a court-appointed lawyer who was explaining in stark terms the jail time she was facing for conspiracy wire fraud and perjury. The dream of a life of luxury with Jonathan had evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of legal consequences. Her loyalty to Jonathan, which had been transactional at best, vanished completely. Her only goal now was self-preservation. When Judge Morrison reconvened the court, the change was dramatic. Walter Schmidt stood, his posture one of utter defeat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice heavy, "after conferring with my client, we wish to withdraw our petition for divorce and all associated claims against Mrs. Bishop." Adrian Cross rose slowly. "That's not good enough, Your Honor." Schmidt flinched. "My client is prepared to offer a settlement, a very, very generous one. My client is not interested in Mr. Pierce's generosity," Adrian countered, his voice like ice. "The evidence presented in this court today has demonstrated a criminal conspiracy to defraud my client and has revealed that the plaintiff's primary marital asset, Pierce Innovations, was founded upon stolen intellectual property belonging to my client's late father. This is not a matter for negotiation." Adrian turned to look at Jonathan and Amber. "However," he said, My client is a compassionate woman. She has no desire for protracted criminal proceedings that would only cause more pain to her family. Therefore, we are prepared to offer a one-time, non-negotiable settlement." He slid a document across the table to Schmidt. "The terms are simple," Adrian announced to the court. "One Mr. Pierce will immediately sign over 100% of his shares and controlling interest in Pierce Innovations to a trust in Catherine Bishop's name. 2. He will cede ownership of all marital properties, both foreign and domestic, and all personal bank and investment accounts to Mrs. Bishop. 3. Amber Collins will return the $400 to $1,000 she received and sign a confession detailing her role in the conspiracy, in exchange for which Mrs. Bishop will agree not to pursue private criminal charges. And 4. Adrian paused, letting the final term land with maximum impact. Mr. Pierce will walk away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a personal debt to the IRS, which will be notified of these proceedings. He will sign a binding agreement never to contact Catherine Bishop or their children again." It was not a settlement. It was an annihilation, a complete and total stripping of a man's life's work, his fortune, and his identity. Jonathan looked at the document, then at Catherine. Her face was calm, resolute. The woman he had tried to break was now the arbiter of his fate. He saw no pity there, only justice. He looked at Amber, who was already nodding frantically to her lawyer, eager to take the deal that would keep her out of jail. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, Jonathan Pierce picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed away his entire world. The final stroke of Jonathan's pen on the settlement document was not a flourish, but a scratch of surrender. The sound was barely audible yet in the funereal silence of the courtroom. It was a thunderclap of finality. He pushed the papers away as if they were contaminated, his face a mask of hollow disbelief. The empire he had built on lies had crumbled to dust in less than a day. Amber Collins, her face stained with tears of relief, signed her own confession with a speed that bordered on desperation. She was trading a stolen fortune for her freedom, a bargain she was now grateful to make. As a bailiff escorted her from the room to finalize her statement, she didn't even glance at Jonathan. Their toxic alliance, forged in ambition and greed, had dissolved into mutual ruin. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents, his expression stern. He looked at Jonathan, a man who had entered his courtroom that morning as a powerful millionaire, now reduced to a penniless pariah. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said, his voice devoid of any sympathy, "this court accepts the terms of this settlement. Let me be clear. The evidence brought to light today suggests a pattern of behavior that is not just unethical, but deeply criminal. You should consider the terms offered by Mrs. Bishop an act of profound mercy, a mercy it seems you were not prepared to offer her. This case is dismissed, and I would strongly advise you to get your life in order." With a final resounding bang of the gavel, it was over. Reporters swarmed Jonathan as he stumbled out of the courtroom, a dazed, broken man. He pushed past their shouted questions, his eyes empty. He had nothing left to say. He had nothing left at all. Inside the now empty courtroom, Catherine remained seated. The adrenaline that had sustained her for the past 2 days was finally fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but also a quiet, profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. She had survived. Adrian Cross sat beside her, allowing her a moment to absorb the magnitude of the victory. He had not just won her case. He had reclaimed her father's legacy. "It's over," she said the words, feeling foreign and new. "It's a new beginning," he corrected gently. She turned to him, her eyes clear and filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. "How can I ever thank you, Adrian? You didn't just save me. You honored my father." "I paid a debt," he said simply, a rare, small smile touching his lips. "Your father believed in standing up to bullies. It seems to be a family trait." Catherine smiled back, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in over a year. She was no longer Catherine Pierce, the discarded wife. She was Catherine Bishop, the guardian of her father's genius, the head of a multi-million-dollar tech company, and the architect of her own future. They walked out of the courthouse together, emerging into the bright afternoon sun. For Catherine, it felt like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel. The city buzzed with life, a world of possibilities she had thought was closed to her forever. She had a company to run her father's company. She would have to learn to grow to become the leader it deserved. It was a daunting task, but for the first time she felt not fear, but a thrilling sense of purpose. She was her father's daughter, and she would make him proud. Adrian walked her to his car. "What will you do now?" he asked. "First," she said, her voice firm with newfound strength, "I'm going to call my children and tell them that everything is going to be okay. Then I'm going to learn how to run a company. I think I'll rename it the Bishop Institute for Technology, something my father would have liked." He nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. "He would have. And Catherine," he added, "if you ever need a lawyer." She laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "I have your number, Adrian. Thank you for everything." As the black sedan pulled away, Catherine Bishop didn't look back at the courthouse. She looked forward through the windshield at the open road ahead. The future was unwritten, but for the first time, in a very long time, she knew she was the one holding the pen. And so Catherine Bishop's story in that cold courtroom came to an end. But her real story, the one she would write for herself, was just beginning. This wasn't just a tale of betrayal and divorce. It was a story about the enduring power of integrity, the long echo of a good deed, and the hidden strength that lies within us when we are pushed to the absolute brink. It's a stark reminder that the most elaborate lies can be undone by the simplest truths, and that justice sometimes is not just about winning a case, but about reclaiming a legacy. What did you think of Adrian's final move in the courtroom? Was it pure genius or pure savagery? What would you have done in Catherine's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will have you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.